Hello, I'm Eric Saunders and I serve as the Executive Director for New Hope Ministries. It's 2023 and we are coming to you today to include you in a conversation about what was going on in Dillsburg 40 years ago when New Hope was being founded. In this 40th anniversary year, we're taking some time to celebrate the work of the last few decades, to acknowledge the people who played an important role in our ministry, and to cast a vision of what's going to be happening next for our organization. With me today are my good friends Marian Musser, who was one of our founding board members at New Hope, and Linda DeCroes, who's been one of our longest serving staff members and who played an integral role not just in the early days but up to today in her work with folks at New Hope Ministries. So Marian, you had a really important role in the founding of this organization, and I wonder if you could just tell us what was happening back in 1982 as New Hope was being planned.
Well, in 1982, January of 1982, the federal government announced significant cuts to all domestic programs, especially in the realm of human services. And that meant that the Dillsburg-Dover Social Services Center, the only social service center in this area, was going to be closed. At the same time, there were layoffs at Caterpillar and Harley-Davidson, and families who had been laid off were facing financial crises who had never faced financial crises before. And the churches experienced families coming asking for assistance, families that they didn't know, who weren't necessarily part of their congregations. In response to this, Reverend Charles Best, the pastor of the Monaghan Presbyterian Church and president of the Dillsburg Ministerium, sent a letter to his colleagues addressing these concerns. Somehow this letter got into to members of the Peace and Social Justice Committee at the Grantham Brethren in Christ Church, and they began wrestling with the question, is this something that we should address? And so they decided to do some legwork to find out what might be involved in setting up a center to fill in the gap. And as they were doing their legwork and information gathering, it became evident that they were going to have to form a nonprofit. So big questions. It was never intended to be a denominational ministry, even though it was, in a sense, birthed out of the Peace and Social Justice Committee at the Grantham Brethren in Christ Church. What would the name of the ministry be? Well, New Hope Ministries, and a whole lot of other organizational pieces had to be put together, but we knew we wanted to go to the churches in this area and get support for their being part of this effort to have a nonprofit, New Hope Ministries, established in their community.
It's such an interesting name, New Hope. And you think about faith, hope, and love, and you guys chose hope. I wonder what were those original values and goals you had as an organization that Hope stood out so clearly?
Well, we were guided by Christian values, the love of God for each person, and also the scriptures that scriptures in James and then in 1 John 3:16 to 18, I think it is, that tell us that if we love God, then we're going to respond to the needs of those around us who need help with clothing, who need help with material assistance and food. And those were guiding values for all the members on the committee and the task force that was formed from that committee. the concept of hope is that as people are in a crisis and they don't know where to turn, if they come to a place where those needs are going to be met, or they're guided to where they can have those needs met, it gives them hope.
Yeah.
And so that's why Hope was New Hope Ministries. That's why that name was chosen. And then the logo, we knew we had to have a logo.
Uh-huh.
None of us on this task force had any experience in founding an organization or in social services, but we knew that organizations have logos. So we assigned one of the artistic members of our task force to come up with some drafts, and we specified that we wanted to have a cross and as a sign of our Christ-centered mission, in a sense, and a butterfly as a symbol of hope and transformation.
Yeah.
That we hoped would begin to take place in the lives and families of those that were ministered to, that were assisted.
And if you look at New Hope's logo today, we still have the cross and we still have the butterfly as common elements that have followed us for 40 years.
There have been several revisions of that logo, but it still has the same elements, as you say. Yeah.
You know, Linda, you've been a part of this organization for a long time. Can you remember back to the early days and what it meant to have a place like New Hope that people could come to for help?
Absolutely. Because I had worked in Northern York County before New Hope Ministries, I realized that the people were very plain. They were very proud people, especially the elderly. They just hated to ask for help, and there were no medical services out here. There was no mental health services or anything like that here. And so the people were just sort of left behind. And then when I was hired, I was still being paid by the state for a while, and my job was to go out into the community and find out what the needs were. And I kept coming up with children. You know, the children needed bones set and all of these other medical problems that existed among the poor, especially the poor. And I know that finally I went to the county commissioners and I said, you know, all these services are needed, what do we do? And he suggested that we do a big survey of the people in all of Northern York County, Dover, part of Lewisberry, and found out through the work of also Messiah College, who read the survey for us, that there were many services that the people wanted. So it was a real desire for us and the Advisory Council of New Hope Ministries. By that time it was incorporated. We were able to start offering those services to the poor. And those that couldn't get here, I went and got.
That's wonderful. You know, I'm looking at our records, and in that first year, we served 239 families.
Wow.
And you had nothing to start with. I don't know how you got this started.
And a budget of $12,000. Well, no, seed money.
Yes.
Of $12,000.
Yes.
But as other churches and individuals started contributing, I think we ended up with about $34,000 of revenue that year. But even so, we went on faith.
We did.
We really went on faith.
Yes.
And also,
Not much has changed, I got to tell you.
That's true.
And also, we were very volunteer dependent.
Yes.
And many volunteers came and helped because we only had first Jolene as a part-time worker. She was going to work from 10 to 2, and that was within a month. We knew we needed to increase that from 9 to 3. And then the following year, Jolene and Linda shared a full-time position, each of them working 20 hours. But those were our only paid staff, and all of the rest of the work was done by volunteers. And so we're so grateful for the way the community got behind New Hope Ministries.
Really did. And the advisory council was formed from people from the individual churches that supported us and just regular people in the community that said, hey, what are you guys doing down there? Whatever you're doing, it's working. Can we help? And so it just grew and grew.
It did work.
It did.
You know, and I think it's remarkable, and I wasn't here at the time, so I love hearing the stories. It wasn't very long before the churches of Dover, you know, through the Dover Ministerium came knocking on our door.
I think 2 years later, yes, they wondered if we could start a New Hope Center in Dover, and we said we can do that if the churches and individuals in Dover are committed with the resources to sustain a center there, because the people here in Dillsburg, they're not going to like if we just take these resources and be giving them to Dover. So they did. Within a year?
Oh, yes.
Within a year of their coming to us, we were opening a Dover Center because the people there stepped up to want to.
And I think the major church was the Lutheran Church, Calvary Lutheran, because the secretary there was the one that got calls from the people in the community needing help.
Yeah.
And actually, we hired her as the first director of New Hope Ministries.
That's kind of how it works.
It is how it works. You get a volunteer, and you never know they're going to be hired sooner or later. But it grew from there, and it's just amazing.
You know, today we're touching the lives of 9 communities. And I find it remarkable, and how many people who have shared so generously with New Hope over the years and have gotten past I want to make sure that my gift gets used in my community, to be able to say, you're doing God's work, and if you can help somebody who's a neighbor, whether they live in Dillsburg or Dover or Littlestown, you just take care of folks, and we trust you to use our gifts.
Yes.
And that's been wonderful to see the barriers break down between churches and saying, I'm Pentecostal and I'm Lutheran and I'm Methodist and I'm Presbyterian, you know, and to be able to come together and say, we're Christians. We're called by Christ's name, and we can care for our neighbors and love our neighbors as ourselves, as Jesus taught us.
The reality is that New Hope wouldn't be what it is today if it weren't for our Christian brothers and sisters in all the denominations that are part of New Hope. Do you have a current figure of how many churches are supporting New Hope Ministries?
It's in the hundreds. I could look it up. I don't have it to hand, but how remarkable it is.
I think it's about 208, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And I think the most remarkable thing about this is that we started with 1, we're now at 9. We've never lost focus on who we serve.
Yeah.
And that is an amazing success. He is always present.
The mission and the vision has stayed firm.
Yes.
And
so you can see that original organization in the ministry that you started 40 years ago that's here, still working today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So and that's a credit to the board members, for whom the mission and the vision has been important, and every executive director who has been hired has shared that vision, and no one has tried to talk us out of pursuing and maintaining that mission and vision. I know some organizations where that's been problematic, and I've been so grateful that New Hope has not had to wrestle with that issue because of the intentionality in the choice of board members and executive directors.
that is probably where we need to start wrapping things up. But a couple of things I think still need to be said, and that is by the end of our first decade, New Hope had 3 different offices. Mechanicsburg was added thanks to the support of the churches and the Mechanicsburg Council of Churches. And you know, we were doing good work across 2 counties and across 3 communities, you know, by 1993. Linda, I'm going to ask if you can remember any stories from the early days of people whose lives were touched by New Hope that stand out to you decades later.
Yes, I remember especially a mother that lived deep in the mountain here in Dillsburg that was abused terribly by her husband, and she really needed to get out and was very fearful of leaving him for what he might do to her.
Well, I'm going to stop you there, and we're going to pick up that story in the next conversation that we have. And the next conversation is going to be us focusing on decade number 2, because it's so important that we want to say thank you to everybody who played a part. And it's so important while we still have our founders who have such good memories of the early days of our ministry, that we're able to capture some of those stories and share them with folks today, but also for the future. And maybe that we'll be looking back at this at our 50th anniversary or our 60th anniversary. So thank you all for watching today, for being a part of our conversation. And I invite you to come back and be a part of our next episode where we discuss Decade 2 at New Hope Ministries.